Good morning, folks. This is Maria Cardiellos. I'm the Executive Director for the IJIS Institute, and I welcome you to yet another edition of the CJIS Security Policy updates that the IJIS Institute has the pleasure of partnering with FBI CJIS and in providing you information related to recent updates and those updates on the horizon. What we typically do with these introductions is to provide you a brief overview of the organization, of our committee structure that then focuses on this particular effort, and then we get into the heart of the discussion with different representatives that will speak to the details. With me today is Charlie Schaefer, who leads Public Safety and Justice for Microsoft, Chris Weatherly, forgive me folks, from FBI CJIS. Each of these individuals bring extreme skills, not only in their past lives, in their current positions, but most importantly, understanding the practitioner and the industry needs as the CJIS security policy evolves. I'm going to ask our Master of Ceremonies, Alex McAdoo, to show our slides. I have a couple of introduction slides that we'll walk through. Once I see them, wonderful. Thank you, Alex. We can go to slide 2, please. I just want to give you a little bit of an update or a little explanation of who IJIS is. I can't see the number of individuals that we have in the session. I know that we had somewhere in the area of 400 attendees that were going to be joining us today. It's for those purposes of those individuals that may be new to IJIS that we sort of give this overview. The IJIS Institute is a nonprofit collaboration network that has been in play for 22 years. It was originally seeded by the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, with the original intent to better the relationship and increase the communication between what were the classic justice practitioners and those service providers or vendors at the time that were supporting their mission cause. At that time, it was primarily the CAD and the RMS vendors. To that extent, the goal was to understand each other better, know what each other's requirements were, and then ultimately maximize safety, efficiency, and productivity. The next slide. How we basically address not only the mission of improving safety and justice within the broader communities nationwide, but then in doing so in an efficient and effective manner, is to focus on the policies, the processes, and the information sharing standards. As we all know well, federal policies, state policies, local policies may often seek to accomplish and support the same goal, but don't do so in mirror reflection of one another and sometimes contradict one another. The processes, similarly, whether it's state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, again, may seek to accomplish the same goals, but don't do so in the same steps. And understanding the nuances of those policies and of those processes is key and paramount to the IJIS success in meeting what are project goals. More importantly, information sharing standards is what allows us to be able to share data, and of course that being the core area of success, share data in a way that is not only effective but efficient. Interoperability, going beyond what are proprietary solutions, is the core effort that we look towards, and those that from a community standpoint we seek to realize. Alex. I won't go through the 22 years with you, but I will say that keeping in mind that original goal of bettering the communication between public sector and private sector, over the years, and unfortunately, given world events of 9/11, of Katrina, of Sandy, of keeping up the pace with technology, of school violence, and ultimately of the COVID pandemic, we have stepped up to what are the needs of our broader sector, public sector technology world, our public sector domains, not only on a federal level, but state, county, and local as well. Each of those needs has evolved over time. The need for data from an availability standpoint, from an analysis standpoint, from an ability to be able to give that to the responders that are addressing what are concerns that are happening imminently in a time-sensitive fashion is truly the goal of our efforts. Next slide, Alex. When I spoke about our initiation point 22 years ago, I made reference to the term of the classic justice domains. and obviously police, courts, corrections, etc. Over the 22 years, we emerged to public safety, emergency medical services, emergency management, and of course, post 9/11, we all fell into the world. We all supported the world of Homeland Security. And not only in reality, but in vernacular, Homeland Security is in fact hometown security. Health and Human Services and our challenging times of what are opioid concerns, substance abuse issues, mental health issues, etc., is another factor and domain that is near and dear to our hearts, but one that we partner with often in order to not only share the data back to the justice community in order to meet those collective needs, but then support their cause as well, however we best can. From an education standpoint, school safety, be that at the primary, secondary, or university levels, is always about the ability to be able not only to share the data, to respond to an event, but ideally to prevent an event. And of course, from a critical infrastructure perspective, whether those are physical infrastructures or as this webinar ultimately touches on, cyber security issues because of the value of the data. Alex, next slide. This is, I believe, is one of our last slides. And really the intention of this slide is to depict and visualize what is the manner that the IJIS Institute works and ensures the partnership between public and private sector. When I made reference to the collaboration network, it's not only the industry representatives that support public sector, it is the practitioner organizations, it's academic institutions, it's standards organizations, it is statisticians, it is city managers, it's all different organizations and bodies that ultimately need the information, share the data, or look to share the data more efficiently and more effectively, and are better able to meet their individual mission objectives in a comprehensive fashion. How we do that is in ensuring that this collaboration network enables them the venue and the opportunity to be able to partner at different tables and have those open dialogues. From a mechanical standpoint, our organization is led by a board of directors that represents the private sector because of our history. We're in the process of standing up a board of advisors to represent the public sector and those domains that ultimately I made reference to earlier, and that we continue to share and to support over our future years. But then we have what are mission-specific advisory committees. You'll see that we have 7 listed here. Not surprisingly, we have what are the classic law enforcement and criminal justice advisory committees that support what are local and then federal law enforcement individuals, respectively, and then, of course, the courts and corrections. Those additional committees that we've stood up of late include the Emergency Communications and Response Advisory Committee to speak to what are the immense changes and really culture change that has happened within the call taking and dispatching arena. The data analytics that then speaks to the world's desire, need, expectation to be able to share data, receive data, slice and dice data, interpret it intelligently based upon the quality of that data, and then be able to utilize that within the domain and to select partners as the authorities allow. Lastly is our Information Technology Advisory Committee that, of course, speaks to what are the current and the emerging technologies that are available to the group, and then those that are of critical import from a transition perspective to the public sector domain. It is this group that then has several different working committees and working groups, amongst others, that then Charlie Schaefer leads for us as a committee chair that then has the specific working group that in turn focuses on the CJIS security policy changes and updates. With that in mind, I thank you all once again for joining us. I'm going to pass the podium and the virtual mic to Charlie. I'm going to let him chat with you a little bit about what's happening at the committee level, and then we are going to give it to the man of the hour, Chris, in order to be able to discuss what are the critical issues happening within the policy, and as I said, most recently and on the horizon. So Charlie,
great.
I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Maria. And I'll be brief. As Maria stated, I'm responsible for the work group that is going through the CJIS security policy modernization as it's being approved by the FBI director. We have a group of folks that are taking that policy and looking at the impact of the policy and essentially trying to educate and help the practitioners and industry conform to policy. So we're taking each of the subsections and we're creating what I like to call a Cliff Notes version. We're distilling it down to what is actionable and what is required and making it digestible for the practitioner and industry, because we know that we have to do this in partnership. We can't do it alone. And so there are different companies and organizations that are better at fulfilling certain aspects of the policy. And we're putting those forth as part of this Cliff Notes version. So if you're looking at different portions that you need to implement, at least you have a head start with who to ask and where to go. So what we're talking about today is version 5.9.2 that was approved late last year. And what we have been doing as the IJIS Institute, we have been stepping through those, and we're pipelining some artifacts that we're going to publish once they are approved. So stand by for that. You'll be seeing those. If you go to the IJIS website, we'll be publishing them there. And you'll see as the policy gets approved, you're going to be seeing more and more artifacts. And just a shameless plug, this is the second webinar that we have proposed as an institute, and we're going to have several more. We're going to drill down not just into the versions of the policy, but we're going to drill down into the subsections and have specific webinars for access and authentication, media protection. We're going to go through and not just talk about them at a high level, but we're going to drill down and say, this is what you need to do to make yourself conform it to policy. So without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you Chris Weatherly. He probably doesn't need an introduction. I'm sure all of you know who he is, but he is going to be off camera because he is having internet issues. And so Alex is going to be running his slides, but it'll be Chris Weatherly's voice behind that. And thank you all for attending, and we'll have some question and answer period at the end so we can address specific questions that you have. Thank you for coming and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that introduction. I'm just want to verify that everybody can still hear me. I am having some internet issues.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Great. So thank you. A good day to everyone who has signed up to participate in this. I see over 300 participants. That is very awesome to hear. And it lets me know that people are thirsty for the knowledge of the CJIS security policy. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. I'm the Information Security Officer for the FBI CJIS Division, Criminal Justice Information Services Division. And today we're going to be looking at what the CJIS security policy is from a high-level overview and when it applies, and almost as important, I'll walk you through the policy modernization. The version that is currently published and on the street is version 5.9.2. And then the last slide is a slide that will display the ISO, the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer resources that we have here in West Virginia. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. This is the CJIS division. We're located in north central West Virginia on about 986 acres up here. We employ roughly about 3,200 individuals here at the facility. The main facility was opened in April of 1995 to the employees. We opened the Biometric Technology Center in around 2015, and it is the premier biometrics technology center in the world. It was done in collaboration with the Department of Defense, and several modalities of biometrics are stored and housed, processed, reviewed, analyzed here in this Biometric Technology Center. Next slide, please. The mission, I want to read the mission of the CJIS division and kind of tie it back to information security. There are three triads of information security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Community partners with criminal justice information they need to protect the United States while protecting civil liberties. So when you still live down into information assurance, you get confidentiality, integrity, and availability, because the mission here is to provide the right information to the right person at the right time. We do have while protecting civil liberties, while this call will focus on the criminal justice agencies, a lot of non-criminal justice agencies use criminal justice information to make decisions on soccer coaches or teachers, nurses, and to make sure that they do not have a questionable past when they have access to our vulnerable populations. Next slide. So the CJIS security policy applies to everyone dealing with criminal justice information. And when we look at Section 4 of the CJIS security policy, it defines criminal justice information as that FBI CJIS provided information. Now, you may have it at your local or your state repository, something that just contains either only state data or only local data. And it's very possible that the CJIS security policy does not apply to that information. So we need to keep in mind when we're looking at the CJIS security policy that it applies to criminal justice information, and that is information provided from FBI CJIS information, managed information systems. In 1994, then Director Louis Freeh established the CJIS Advisory Policy Board, and into that, we joined into a shared management philosophy with our users from across the nation. The little bullet under the shared management philosophy heading there, you'll likely hear this from an auditor or a state auditor or a local auditor that's trying to get you to come into conformance with the CJIS security policy, and you ask, why do I have to do this? And mostly, ironically, their answer will be, well, the FBI said it had to be this way. That is false. We entered into this shared management philosophy. Twice a year, we bring in representatives from across the nation, one state representative, one local representative from that state, and we discuss these changes to the policy that we're going through. And we get their input. We get their advice on how the information or the policy may or may not work. So we definitely, it's not the FBI said so. It's not Chris Weatherly said so. It is, in fact, a shared management philosophy where the nation believes this is where we should be moving our CJIS security policy. It is the minimum set of security requirements required for connectivity. You can go above and beyond the CJIS security policy if you choose. But if you're going to be processing criminal justice information, you have to at least meet the minimum standards of the CJIS security policy. And the last bullet there, it does have some guidelines and agreements. The policy is, as we modernize it, is becoming bigger, but a lot of that, it does have some guidelines and agreements, sample agreements that are contained within the appendices of the policy. Next slide, please. The CJIS security policy, go ahead and let this slide build there, Alex. The CJIS security policy is rooted in Federal Information System Management, now Modernization Act, which means it contains some presidential directives, federal laws, and FBI directives, but it is tailored by that APB process that I defined on the previous slide. It allows, the CJIS security policy allows that tailoring to happen by those state and local representatives when we take these topics in front of them, as I said, twice a year, and eventually in front of the APB, where they make the recommendation to the FBI director, and the FBI director approves, more than not, approves those recommendations coming out of the APB. Next slide. So we'll jump right into version 5.9.2. It was published on December 7th of 2022. We'll go into the next slide. And it contained several new security control families. As we go through these slides, you'll see the formatting of the slides. Those that have the black background with the white lettering are new requirements. The ones without black background are existing requirements. The differences here is, if you'll notice the date down in the bottom right-hand corner, that is when that requirement becomes sanctionable by the APB. As we jump into this first control family here, awareness and training. There are 18 security control families. Each one of those families will have its own policy and procedures, and it may be that within your state, that the state CJIS systems agency has an overarching awareness and training policy. and locals can inherit that. In fact, I would recommend that you inherit that policy and maybe the procedures at the state level. But if you do have different procedures for implementing the policy associated with the security control family, you will need to note those as well. How are you meeting that policy? What procedures are you using to meet that policy? But inherit controls wherever you can, because it makes it much easier to stay compliant with the CJIS security policy. In AT2, we talk about literacy training and awareness. The policy used to read that you had 6 months to get this security awareness training or awareness in training. Once you got the job, you could be doing the work, but within 6 months, you had to have security awareness training to continue to remain compliant with the CJIS security policy. And you used to have to recertify or retake the security awareness training every 2 years. As we modernized, the policy has changed that you now must have this literacy training and awareness prior to getting access, and then annually thereafter. So every year we're going to be reminding our users of the information assurance requirements within the CJIS security policy. That is a change, as you can see, and will be sanctionable on October 1, 2023. The next new piece of the policy speaks about you'll have literacy training and awareness within 30 days of an incident. And the CJIS security policy currently states within 30 days of an event. So that is something that we're going to be changing. We can have cyber events happening all the time, right? There's someone trying and attempting a distributed denial of service attack on our front door, but they weren't successful, right? So we had an event, but it did not become successful, turning into an incident. So we definitely want to make sure the CJIS security policy is updated there. But if we do have an incident, a successful malicious code attack or a phishing attack, we have a user click on a phishing attack or something like that, we want to make sure that user gets remedial training within 30 days of that incident. The new policy also says that we're going to use products to continually remind our users of their security awareness, of their security responsibilities. And we'll do that through posters or maybe inscribed products, email advisories, log-on messages. The security training must now contain training on insider threat, right? Probably the biggest threat from a personnel security point of view is someone with authorized access, right? So we need to make sure that we're looking at that insider threat to notice those indicators of compromise, if you will, for insider threat. And then social engineering, social mining, that was already existing. Continuing in the AT3, we'll see there. I used to say, we've reduced this down to 3, but now we're back up to 4. We do have the role-based training for someone who has unescorted access into the physically secure location. Think about your service providers, your janitorial staff, those vending machine providers, someone who has unescorted access into the physically secure location where criminal justice information is being processed. And then the general user. This is someone who has logical access onto the system. Privileged users, anybody other than general, right? This is your administrator staff, people who keep the systems running. They have a different level of training. And then one of the challenges here, I call it Chastity's challenge. It was the compact officer of the FBI. This would normally say LASSO, where we're talking about personnel with information security responsibilities. But when you go over, LASSO being a local agency security officer, but when you go over to the non-criminal justice side of the house, they don't have LASSOs. They have ARSOs, authorized recipient security officers, or SPOCs, security points of contact. So Chastity, the compact officer of the FBI, challenged me, make the CJIS security policy about the data. Don't make it about a specific community. So therefore, you'll see throughout the modernized policy, we'll have personnel with certain responsibilities. When we get to role-based training, this will be personnel with information security responsibilities. They get specialized training to include the recent changes to the CJIS security policy. And then we're also going to have personally identifiable information, the employment and operation of that PII, processing and transparency controls, also as role-based training. Again, notice the date down in the lower right-hand corner. Those with a black background are sanctionable by the CJIS APB starting in October 1, 2023. Next slide, please. The last control within awareness and training relates to the training records. Documenting the training was always existed, and existing controls are auditable and sanctionable immediately. And then the new control here, or the new piece of the AT4, is that we're going to maintain the records of that training for 3 years. And that's going to align with the FBI CJIS audit, where we come to audit the CJIS Systems Agency once every 3 years. That's it for awareness and training. We'll move on to the next security control family here. And this was a big one. This is a big change for the communities. It's identification and authentication. And before we get into this, it's very important to know what type of authenticators you're using and focus solely on those types. And we'll get into those types here in just a couple of slides. Again, IA1 is policy and procedures. If the state or your local municipality has a policy that you can inherit, that you're going to do the identification and authentication the same way, inherit that policy. What about the procedures? Are they different? Are you implementing different procedures to meet the state's identification and authentication policy? If you are, then you must document them. If you're not, inherit those procedures as well. IA2, the organizational users, is not a new control, sanctionable immediately, and it's just uniquely identifying and authenticating those organizational users. One of the biggest changes that we've had thus far to the CJIS security policy, the policy used to read that if you were accessing criminal justice information from outside a physically secure location or a criminal justice conveyance, a police car, a patrol car, something like that, you did not have to have what the policy called advanced authentication. With the modernization of the policy, multi-factor authentication is going to be required no matter who you are or where you are. Sitting within a police cruiser or a criminal justice conveyance, multi-factor authentication is required. Sitting in a dispatch center, a physically secure location, multi-factor authentication is required. The difference between IA2.1 and IA2.2 is the privileged and non-privileged accounts, right? Someone who has logical access and then someone who has better than that. And again, we're talking like your administrator staff or something like that. The date down in the lower right-hand corner, October 1, 2024, is when it becomes sanctionable by the CJIS APB. So again, multi-factor authentication, no matter who you are or where you are. Next slide. Some of that multi-factor authenticator must be replay resistant, meaning that it cannot be recorded and used in a later session, right? If you're using PIV credentials, you must be able to accept and electronically verify those PIV credentials against the federal bridge. One of the new changes as well, device identification or authentication, where we want to uniquely identify and authenticate those agency devices before establishing those remote and network connections, right? Remote connections, think about the internet, a remote network that we cannot control, right? We don't control the internet, so that's considered defined as a remote connection. Network connections would be something that you have in your local area network. And then where it speaks about the local connection is something we're talking like a serial port on the back of a server or something like that. The device must be approved by the agency, identified and authenticated prior to connecting to that agency asset. We want to know what's coming onto our systems before we allow that device onto our systems. Again, October 1, 2024. Next slide, please. Identifier management, most of this is not new, so therefore it would be sanctionable immediately. The one piece that is new is preventing reuse of the identifier for 1 year. And what this means is it's if we have JC Weatherly, that is an identifier that I use on an information system. If I should retire or move on or something like that, then we want to make sure that we don't reuse that JC Weatherly should another JC Weatherly come into the scene for at least 1 year. And this aligns with your audit record retention and making sure that we don't get confused on which JC Weatherly it was. So that's the reason we want to prevent the reuse of those identifiers for 1 year. Next slide, please. This was the biggest piece, or one of the two biggest pieces of identification authentication. And as I opened this presentation on IA, I said, know which type of authenticator you're using, and focus solely on those requirements. As I said earlier, and I think Charlie mentioned as well, as we modernize this policy, it's becoming quite large. This particular section of the policy, identification authentication, added 110 pages to the policy. The reason for that is that the Security Control Task Force, which was a consortium of your peers from across the nation, didn't want you to have to go to other documents looking for additional information. They wanted all that information to be in the CJIS Security Policy. So we gathered all that information from NIST 853, NIST 863, and brought it into the CJIS Security Policy so that you could just focus on this one particular piece when it got into authenticator management. Back in 2021, CJIS criminal justice information was deemed moderate on a FISMA impact scale out of moderate or low, moderate, and high. So therefore, at a moderate level for the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we are at an authentication assurance level of 2 out of 3. Authentication, as you'll see in the second bullet there, it's either going to occur by the use of a multi-factor authentication or a common authenticator, or a combination of 2 single-factor authenticators. And that's primarily what I think we'll see initially within our communities, is that identities are using a combination of 2 single-factor authenticators. And we'll get into those in just a second. You can see the next sub-bullet under there says, unless we're using multi-factor authenticators, we must use a memorized secret plus another authenticator, something that's going to show possession. Biometrics shall only be used as a part of the multi-factor authentication with a physical authenticator, something you have, right? Which means we couldn't use a memorized secret or a password or PIN in a biometric. If we're using a biometric, we must use something else that we have. And then I get this question a lot. What about I unlocked my mobile device using a PIN or a biometric? That's part of multi-factor authentication, correct? The answer is no. The device unlock is not a factor of authentication when we're getting access to criminal justice information. Next slide, please. There are 9 different types of authenticator types, and when we speak about memorized secret, it is a sexy word for password and PIN, right? We've always had passwords, we've always had personal identification numbers. They've been combined into this term memorized secret. Complex passwords, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers, those passwords that require complexity, that is going away, and it's going to be sunset. We're recommending that it be sunset in October 1, 2025. But to do that, we're going to allow long passphrases and passwords, right? Your password can be pretty much anything you want it to be, as long as it's easier for you to remember. But for that reason, we must maintain a list of compromised passwords that have shown up on previous breaches or that have been popped before, because we don't want to be using passwords that are known in the wild. So we want to make sure we're using passwords that are known to the user, that the system, you'll see the next bullet there, the system does not truncate. So my password could be, I like pearl milling baking pancakes, and that could be my password. The system is not allowed to truncate it. We want to make sure that we're using that in long passwords, long phrases. The system can no longer provide us with a hint. What is your favorite breakfast food, right? We can't say that anymore. And you and I could share the same long password. And the reason we can do that is because before it's stored in the directory service, the system must salt and hash the memorized secret before it's storing. The system is going to add a unique salt that the user doesn't have to maintain knowledge of, but the system just knows that it's a unique password because it's added that unique salt, 32-bit to password, and then hashes it before it stores it in its directory service. So that is one of the authenticator types. The next type is lookup secrets. Excuse me. Lookup secrets, a lot of these organizations still use bingo cards. The lookup secret, it says use only once per authentication. What that means is actually in the third bullet. If you're using a bingo card, each grid can only be used once during each authentication session. So if we have a bingo card consisting of 20 grids, I can't routinely or I can't send the user the identity to the same grid every time. Enter the character in A1, 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 A1. I can only use each grid once during each authentication session. Of course, once we get a successful authentication, the grid card opens back up. The grid cards must have at least 20 bits of entropy. Entropy is defined as the amount of randomness that is located on the card. But those are still something that a lot of agencies are using and still acceptable within the CJIS security policy. There was a mentality a few years back that I couldn't send that second factor of authentication to the same device I was using to access criminal justice information. And a few years back, we defined that. It's okay to send it back to the same device. Send it via a separate channel. I'm using criminal justice information application. Make sure that that second factor of authentication comes to something else. It doesn't come back in the same application that I'm accessing criminal justice information. That's where we get into separate. And must show possession. Therefore, the second factor of authentication cannot no longer go to an email address or to a VoIP telephone, a voice over IP telephone, because it does not show possession. We can't bind that authenticator to an email address. We can't bind the authenticator to a VoIP telephone. So the second factor to some, i.e., we can no longer use email or VoIP telephones. One-time use, of course, and then the time to live on the out-of-band is 10 minutes before it expires. Continuing in the authenticator types, one-time passwords, they must have 6 digits. The nonce must change at least every 2 minutes. Most of the nonces I know change every minute. But there must be a defined lifetime on that one-time password, and it should account for clock drift and be 30 seconds either side of the clock drift. Then we get into our cryptographic authenticators. They could be software-based, but they must be stored within a suitable storage area, the trusted execution environment, or the trusted platform module of the device, and they cannot be removed from the device. So the authenticator, the software-based cryptographic authenticator, must be assigned to that or installed on that device and authenticated by the identity to be used. If it's a hardware-based cryptographic authenticator, the secret key in the algorithm at the time of writing is 112 bits, and then the nonce would have to have 64 bits of entropy. Now that we've went through the authenticator types here, as I said, it's very important to know which authenticator types you're using and focus solely on those requirements. There are general requirements or privacy requirements, biometric requirements that apply to all authenticators. But then once you choose your authenticator type, just make sure you focus on that piece of the policy, and it'll help you walk your way through the policy. And the remaining will not be applicable to you because you're not using that type of authenticator. All right, rolling into the next slide. IE5.2 public key-based authentication already existed within the CJIS security policy. You must have be able to validate those certificates to a trusted anchor, i.e. being able to check the certificate status, and then have a local cache of revocation data should you lose connectivity with the certificate status upline of you. Protection of the authenticators, we want to make sure it's commensurate with the security categorization. Again, criminal justice information is moderate. IE6 authentication feedback, we want to obscure the feedback when we have an identity pass entering their authenticator. We want to make sure we obscure that to prevent shoulder surfing. Question I get asked routinely: what about the little eyeball that sits on beside the field where I'm inserting or inputting that authenticator? As long as the user can click the eyeball and the authenticator becomes visible. answer is if the eyeball is momentary, i.e. the user clicks it and then when they release it, the obfuscation comes back. That is okay. But if the identity is able to click the eyeball and it persistently displays what's being entered into that field, that is not okay. All right. So make sure it's a momentary eyeball when we're looking at that. And that's very helpful when we have long phrases and long passwords to be able to see at a moment what we're typing in. So make sure it's a momentary click on the eyeball. Next slide, please.
So here we go. If we have, I was speaking about IA8 here on the screen. If you've ever replied all to an email and then noticed who was on the email, and perhaps it would have saved you from saying some things that shouldn't have been said, this uniquely identifies and authenticates as non-organizational users. And maybe I've got a process or something running on the system. Definitely want to identify who the identity's organization is. If we're using IA8.1, if we're using external PIV credentials, again, be able to electronically accept and verify those against a federal bridge. IA8.2 speaks about acceptance of external authenticators, and just make sure that they're, if you have other authenticators that another agency is using, getting access into your system, just make sure that they are CJIS Security Policy compliant. Next screen, please. Next slide. Use of defined profiles. If you're starting to federate identities from system to system, this could be useful when we're using multi-factor authentication. If we federate those, we want to make sure we use one of the two defined profiles for identity management, and that is Security Assertion Markup Language, or SAML, and then OpenID Connect. Those are the two types of identity management profiles that are CJIS Security Policy compliant. As far as re-authenticating the identity, we want to make sure that we re-authenticate that identity when their roles change or when their credentials change. Security categories of the systems change. I really don't see that being useful in this community here. But it could happen. If that identity is moving into a privilege function, we would definitely want to make sure we re-authenticate them. And then if you have someone, some poor soul that's been sitting in front of their system for 12 hours, I'm thinking like a dispatch center or something like that, at the end of that 12 hours, we need to re-authenticate that identity. Next slide, please. This is the second biggest piece of the identification and authentication. It talks about identity proving. And what we're doing is we're actually resolving user identities to a unique individual and collecting, validating, verifying the evidence that they're going to give us to make sure it is in fact who they say they are that is trying to gain access, logical access onto our system. Next slide. The way we're going to do that is we're going to start to gather evidence. But before we do that, we're going to talk to them about the PII that we're collecting. We only want to collect the amount of PII that we need to complete the mission and nothing more, because the more PII you collect, the more you have to protect him. We also have to give, when it starts talking about the CSP shall provide explicit notice to the applicant at the time of collection, we want to make sure that we tell them what attributes are necessary for identity proofing, which ones are voluntary, which ones are mandatory, and what's the consequences for not providing those attributes. Next slide. Provide mechanisms for redress. If identity proofing fails, we want to make sure that the applicant redress mechanisms. We want to maintain a record, including the audit logs of all the steps that we took to verify the identity of that applicant, as long as the identity exists within the information system. An enrollment code shall be comprised of one of the following. You'll send an enrollment code to the identity in the identity proofing process to let them know that, hey, that your identity is being used. We're proofing it just to make sure that we are working with the same identity. It has to be a random 6-digit character, alphanumeric, or it could be a QR code, something that contains data of similar entropy. So the way we get into requiring evidence from our identities is that we're going to ask them to either provide us one piece of superior evidence or one piece of strong plus. And the reason we say strong plus is okay is because you can see there in the bullet it speaks about it if the evidence is issuing source during its identity proofing event confirmed the claimed identity by collecting 2 or more forms of superior and strong evidence. And what I'm talking about here, you will give examples here on the next couple of slides. But think about your real ID driver's license. When you went to get it, you had to provide additional pieces of evidence before they would issue that real ID driver's license to you. So we're either looking at one piece of superior or one piece of strong plus. If we get into just strong evidence, we're going to be looking for 2 pieces of strong evidence. Get down to the lowest level acceptable, we're looking for 1 piece of strong evidence plus 2 pieces of fair. Examples are within the CJIS Security Policy. We'll roll to the next slide and we'll give you some examples here as well. A piece of superior evidence, U.S. passport or PIV card, common access card, a CAC for those Department of Defense employees. PIV-I card, that is a non-federal PIV card, perhaps it's just TWIC card, a Transportation Worker Identification card, Native American Enhanced Tribal card. These are superior pieces of evidence. You select to accept or choose to select, I'm sorry, let me say that differently. We choose to accept superior piece of evidence. We must be able to validate it using a superior method of validation. All this is defined within the CJIS Security Policy. So I think really our communities will focus on that strong plus, and that's that real ID driver's license, right? The enhanced ID cards, a U.S. military badge. These are pieces of evidence that a lot of identities will have, and it's something that we can easily verify when we go back to the issuing source. Next slide. Continuing strong evidence, you can see the real ID compliant there. Native American Tribal Photo Identification card. When we get down into fair evidence, we're looking at a school ID card, utility account statements, credit debit card account statements, financial institution account statements. These are considered fair pieces of evidence. We don't accept weak evidence, but I want to give you an example of what weak evidence is, and it's actually a U.S. Social Security card or an original or certified copy of a birth certificate. So I just want to give you evidence or examples of what that was, but again, it's 1 piece of superior or strong plus, 2 pieces of strong, or 1 piece of strong and 2 pieces of fair. During this identity proofing, we're going to do that registration code or that enrollment code that I was talking about a minute ago. We can enter, it has to be delivered via out of band, and we can either deliver it to a physical address identified as a postal address, or if it's a digital, we can send it to an email address or telephone number. Now, where we're sending it, the identity cannot self-assert that address data. We have to glean it from the evidence that we've asked the identity to give to us. And then enrollment code shall have time to live if we send it within the last thing I'll hit on this slide is the enrollment code time to live. If it's sent it's sent within the contiguous U.S. to a postal address, we have 10 days for that time to live. 30 days outside the contiguous. If it's sent to a telephone, SMS, 10 minutes, and then email address, 24 hours. Again, these addresses, these telephone numbers, email addresses cannot be self-asserted by the identity. They must come from the evidence that the identity provided during its the identity proofing process. Next slide, please. System and services acquisition is itself an entire control family. When we published 5.9.2, we were able to successfully get this one control out of the system and services acquisition approved by the APB, and it talks about unsupported components. If you have unsupported hardware or software components, where I'm saying unsupported, it's no longer supported by the developer, the vendor, or the original manufacturer. And if they can't provide you, if you don't have some other original manufacturer support or contracted vendor support, these outdated hardware and software pieces must be replaced. And the reason is because if you have a piece of supported equipment, hardware, software, then the manufacturer is going to continue to supply you with security patches as vulnerabilities continue to exist. What will happen is once we get to end of life on these devices, the manufacturer will no longer support, they'll no longer send out security patches to make sure that you're remaining safe from cyber vulnerabilities. However, our nation-state adversaries who are working against us will continue to exploit those vulnerabilities, get access into our systems. So if you have unsupported hardware, software components, so that we can maintain compliance with the CJIS security policy. Next slide, please. System and information integrity is the last family that was added to the system, to the CJIS security plan. Again, policy and procedures. If you leave this webinar today, just one thing to remember: patch, patch, patch. Patch your systems. Make sure you're patching your systems with the latest patches that come out. If it's a critical patch, as identified by the CVSS score, make sure it's on there within 15 days. A high patch, 30 days. Medium, 60, low, 90. We want to have some sort of automated flaw remediation status to let us know that we're looking at the system and conducting those vulnerability scans. This says at least quarterly. We just took risk assessment through the APB. They changed that to monthly. We'll be looking at these vulnerability scanning tools, running those at least monthly, identifying these flaws that we have on our system. Next slide, please. All right, malicious code protection, not really a new requirement. As you can see, the first part of this is not black background, but automatically updating the signatures as new releases are available. That is a new requirement. We want to make sure that we're performing periodic scans of the system, at least daily, and on real-time scans of files from these external sources at our network and entry and exit points. Also, a new requirement, blocking or quarantining that malicious code and taking mitigating actions, alerting certain personnel. You can see those within the requirement to alert system network administrators and or organizational personnel with information security responsibilities when we have a malicious code detection. Also, a new requirement addressing the receipt of false positives during malicious code detection, resulting potential impact on the availability. SI4, this is probably the most important security control out of all of them, and it's system monitoring. What is normal traffic on your system? Know what normal traffic looks like, then when abnormal traffic shows up, you'll be easier to detect, right? So we want to monitor the system to detect the attacks and indicators of potential. Looking at our intrusion detection and prevention, our malicious code protection, vulnerability scanning, audit record monitoring, network firewall monitoring. Looking at those unauthorized local network remote connect, and identifying the unauthorized use through your event logging. If you know what normal looks like, abnormal will be easier to find. By far, the most important control that we'll find within the CJIS security policy. Next slide, please. Continuing in this, we want to make sure that where we have these monitoring points strategically within the system, at ad hoc locations, definitely at your network borders, we want to have that. Analyzing those detected events and anomalies, and we want to adjust the level of our system monitoring when we have a change in risk. Routinely, I send out information to your state information security officers about certain things we're seeing at the federal level, certain attacks or malicious code, and I'll alert your local information security officers. So maybe we need to adjust that level of system monitoring when there's a chain of. Of course, we're going to look at legal opinion regarding those system monitoring activities. And then we want to make sure that we get these intrusion detection prevention system logs, our malicious code protection software, all these audit records. We want to make sure that they're getting to the organizational personnel with information security responsibilities. We want to do that at least on a weekly basis. Not new requirements here. It talks about automated tools and mechanisms for real-time analysis, monitoring your inbound and your outbound communications traffic, existing controls within the CJIS security policy, sanctionable immediately. So if you're found by the CJIS audit unit to not have these controls in place, that would be sanctioned immediately. Next slide. System-generated alerts, also not a new control. So security alerts, advisories, directives, not new controls. You will see the new control there at the bottom, implement security directives in accordance with the established timeframes. And that's what we were talking about a minute ago when we have those patches, making sure we have those critical patches on the system within 15 days and our lows, right on down to our low vulnerabilities up to 90 days. Next slide, please. SI7 talks about software, firmware, and information integrity. The new controls here is that integrity check. What we're want to do is we're making sure we're looking at our file structures. And if a change happens to one of those files, who authorized the change? Was it something we were aware of? Or has someone actually gained a foothold within our system? And they're making changes to our file structures. Statistics show that upwards of 248 days, somebody can be in our system undetected. We want to make sure that we're monitoring our system, these software, these firmwares, and information by putting a hash on them or some sort of integrity tool that's going to be looking down in SI7.1. It's going to be looking at this at least weekly or in some automated fashion, looking for that integrity check of that software, firmware, that information systems, that process CJI. Who made the change? Was it authorized? Is it something we're expecting? Again, if we know what normal looks like, then abnormal traffic and abnormal activity is going to be easier. Integration of that response, making sure we get those notifications to our organizational incident response capability. SI8, spam protection, not a new requirement. On the next slide, we will see a new requirement for the spam protection. Next slide, please. About the automatic updates, updating those spam signatures daily. SI10 is an information input validation. It is a new control. And where you have fillable forms on your web pages, we just want to make sure that the fields that the identity is interacting with accepts only characters that it's looking for. If it's supposed to be an alpha character or an alpha field, make sure it only accepts alpha characters. Numeric field, make sure it only accepts numbers. This prevents cross scripting or the way to insert malicious code into your web pages via script kiddies. SI11 talks about error handling, generating those error messages and revealing those error messages only to the organizational personnel with information security response. See the audit dates down here, October 1, 2023. SI12, information management and retention, not new. Limit to personally identifiable information elements. Again, the more PII you collect, the more you have to protect it. Now, there was a question about, can I use PII in testing, training, and research? You can. We just want to make sure that we're taking some techniques to minimize the use of that PII through data obfuscation, or maybe it's randomization, anonymization, or maybe we just use synthetic data. Somebody's first name, somebody else's last name, or make sure it doesn't tie back to a real identity. SI12.3 talks about the information disposal, and we want to make sure that we're following the techniques within MP6, media protection, which was released in 5.9.1. Next slide, please. The last control within SI System and Information Integrity is SI16, memory protection, and we want to make sure that we implement the following controls to protect against that system memory from unauthorized code execution, data execution prevention, or address space layout randomization. Next slide, please. So here's a slide that you want to take note of. I promised you a FBI CJIS ISO resource screen. There are 3 of us that handle the nation from a CJIS security policy perspective. Myself, Chris Weatherly, is the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer. Jeff Campbell serves as the Deputy Information Security Officer for the FBI CJIS Division, and Holden Cross serves as a Senior Technical Analyst who's out there looking for that new and emerging technology that will meet compliance with the CJIS security. If you need, the best way to reach us is through that email address there at the bottom, iso@fbi.gov. Know that when you reach out to us, we are going to include your local, your state information security officer in your response. One, so that he or she knows that we're interacting with you, and they may have some localized policies or some state policies they need to make sure that you're not missing as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Alex.
Thanks so much, Chris. We appreciate your time, and if we can find some time over the next couple of weeks to maybe reschedule and go through the presentation, If it's okay, we did get a couple of questions coming in through the Q&A box. If you have some time, Chris, we'd love to go through it with you.
Yes, sir. That sounds great.
All right. So a couple of folks are asking first and foremost if they'll receive a copy of the presentation. Is that
definitely? I can. Yeah, absolutely. I will make it sure that it's a distributable copy, and I'll send that to the Institute.
Great. And then if you are registered for this session, I will be sure to get that sent out to folks and make that available on our website as well. We got a question in here from Nate. Charlie referenced some publications becoming available on the IJIS website. Is there a link that could be provided to those resources? So Nate, I can answer this one. I think this is in regards to some of the working group deliverables and products that are in the pipeline. We will make these available on our website. I think the first will be published within the next couple of weeks. Another great way to stay updated on opportunities that IJIS is offering include following our social media pages. If you're not already subscribed to our mailing list, that's a great opportunity and a great way to stay in the know on some of those resources. Somebody asked, can we receive a list of the changes and when they're implemented? I think the PowerPoint will cover that, Chris.
So there is also a document that goes along with the CJIS Security Policy, and it's a requirements and companion document, and you can find it on the FBI.gov website. And it's Jeff Campbell, my deputy ISO, has coined it the stuff without the fluff. So it just contains the shall statements and when they become sanctionable by the APB. So I would recommend looking at that.
Okay. When onboarding new employees, how long do they have to complete AT?
Before they get access to criminal justice information. So it used to be within 6 months of their employment, but now you can go ahead and employ them, but before they get access to criminal justice information, they must have the AT requirements.
Great. Is PW expiration still 90 days, or are we moving towards 365 or no expiration, given that we are moving towards past phrases?
That's right. Great question. And that will be disappearing. I mentioned the sunsetting of the complex passwords being in October of 2025. When that expires, or sunsets, we will also move away from expiring passwords. So the password, as long as it hasn't shown up on a previous breach, the password will be good for as long as it doesn't show up on a breach. Let me say it that way. So the password will never expire unless it shows up on a breach.
Okay. With authorization management specs, does anyone know if the settings work out of the box? For example, with DOU or Microsoft Authenticator, or is there settings that need to be changed? I'm not sure if you know the answer to that one, Chris.
I didn't really follow the question. I know our chair of the CJIS Security Policy Working Group for IJIS is intimately aware of Microsoft products.
Yeah. And folks, what we'll do as well, we are taking note of these questions, not only from this session, but the previous iterations. So if there are any questions that aren't able to be answered today, we will be developing a FAQ document, and we will circulate that with Chris and his team to make sure that we have concise answers for all of these. Chris, I think this one's back to you here. I have a two-part question. First, are cities/local law enforcement agencies required to submit CJIS compliance? And then to that point, if technologies that are are not CJIS compliant, how much risk are they assuming? Not just from loss of evidence in court, but is there additional risk?
So from a state so I think it started out, Alex, if you'll help me clarify, it was at a local or municipality? Was that the level we're looking at?
Correct.
Yeah, so definitely work with your CJIS systems agency within your state and your CJIS systems officer. That is the person that is ultimately responsible for the protection of criminal justice information within their area of responsibility, usually at a state, usually within their state. They will work with you to make sure that your systems, and as I opened up the presentation, is it criminal justice information? If it's not, then the CJIS security policy may not apply. But definitely work with your CJIS systems officer. They will make sure that you are in compliance if you are processing criminal justice information. There's no need at the federal level. There's no submission of a statement of compliance. We do look at the CJIS Systems Agency once every 3 years to make sure that they are staying compliant with the CJIS security policy. But work with your local CJIS systems officer and your local CJIS information security officer to make sure that you are remaining compliant, and they will work with you to make sure that your risk is in that acceptable risk appetite.
Great, thanks, Chris. For MFA, can one of the factors such as OTP go to the same device that you are trying to authenticate to?
It can go to the same device. It just needs to be on a secondary channel. So if I'm using a criminal justice information application, the second factor of authentication, in this case, a one-time password, can go to the same device. Just make sure it's through a separate channel. Something I failed to mention, I get questions a lot about an SMS text. SMS, there's a lot of vulnerabilities right now with SMS, SIM swapping, and smishing. I don't know if you've heard of that. Smishing is where you get sent a link and say, click here to receive your 4K TV. Of course, if you didn't order a 4K TV, it's probably too good to be true. But right now, SMS is a restricted authentication delivery method, not yet prohibited. So what will happen if the CJIS audit unit finds that you are using SMS texting to deliver that second factor of authentication? They'll be looking for your plan to get off of it. What are you using to get to move past SMS texting? Because eventually it will roll to a restricted authenticator. So short answer, yes, it can go to the same device. Just make sure it's coming via a secondary channel.
Great. Can you please explain where the various forms of identification come into play? Is this for the initial hiring process?
So this is before someone gets unescorted access to unencrypted CJI or a logical access into your system. That is where the forms of evidence need to be. We need to prove that it is in fact Chris Weatherly or Alex McAdoo standing in front of us before we give them logical access into our criminal justice information. One of the questions I get routinely, is this retroactive or is it day one going forward? It is retroactive, so we need to go back and gather some evidence for that identity. Either we do it, using current evidence, or maybe, what did HR collect when they were looking at hiring the individual? We just need to make sure that it meets the evidence standards within the CJIS security policy. That's when it's needed, when we're giving someone logical access onto a system that processes criminal justice information.
Great. And then somebody is asking if there is a list of recommended or approved solutions and tools that will help agencies meet all of these requirements. And I suspect the answer is no, Chris, but maybe that's something that I just can help with down the line.
And a great answer there, Alex, and we should just stick with your answer. There is no such thing as a CJIS certified product when it comes to the CJIS security policy. If a service provider comes to you and says, I'm CJIS certified, or you call their bluff, because there is no such thing. Now, since we are in partnership with the IJIS Institute, that is part of the piece of that is where IJIS can help. I don't want to get too far in the weeds there because I'm not ultimately intimately familiar with the IJIS processes, but definitely Alex and Orchanda could probably help out more with this answer.
Certainly. Somebody's asking about section 5.13.7.2, advanced authentication. Does indirect access still apply in the policy?
That will be disappearing. Great question. That is 5.13 is actually focuses on mobile devices. A lot of the new modernization, the mobile device, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what device you're using, the security requirements will apply to anything. But specifically to this question, advanced authentication was only required when you were accessing criminal justice information from outside a physically secure location or a criminal justice conveyance. But as I said when we started the identification authentication briefing, multi-factor authentication is required no matter who you are or where you are. So even within a physically secure location, multi-factor authentication will now be required starting in October 1, 2024.
I think you may have covered this, Chris, but I just want to double check. What is covered? What is considered enough time for Section 5.12.1 of the CJIS Security Policy personnel screening requirements of individuals requiring unescorted access to unencrypted CJI?
What was the first part of that question, sir?
What is considered enough time for Section 5.12.1?
Yeah, so 512 deals with personnel security. It is yet to be modernized. It is existing within the CJIS Security Policy today. I'm not sure I'm following the question. Hopefully my answer will address it. But before someone gets unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information, they must have a fingerprint-based background check and awareness training, security awareness training, before they get access to that criminal justice information. So I'm not certain on the question. Maybe it could be phrased a different way, and I could get a more specific answer.
Okay. If any of the new requirements require some investments for which we don't have funding, are there any grants or resources provided by FBI/CJIS to cover some of the costs?
Yeah, great question, and it's one that's asked routinely. FBI CJIS does not yet have any funds available. What I do recommend is that you work with your CISA, Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, and look for your state administrative office. If you search CISA and state administrative office, you will get a point of contact within your state that has the application process for grants associated with cybersecurity improvements. That money is there now and readily available.
Great. Marty is asking about a timeline known for the next release, so 5.9.3. And I think you may have covered this earlier, Chris, but I do want to reemphasize.
Yeah, great. Another great question. 5.9.3 went through the CJIS Advisory Policy Board back in December of 22. It is currently sitting with the director of the FBI and will be released as soon as Director Ray approves it. It will contain the security control families of access control, incident response, and maintenance. And when I say maintenance, I'm not talking about patching, but I'm talking about our peripherals. Who's looking at the copier? Who's coming in to work on the printer? What are they taking with them? What are they hooking to the system? So that's what we're looking at as maintenance. I had anticipated it being published around the first week of June when we had the APB in Phoenix, Arizona here recently, but it's yet to be approved by the director of the FBI. So I don't have a specific timeline, but I will just say soon.
Right. How do we know if our JPA is following the latest requirements?
And forgive me, I'm not familiar with JPA.
I am not either. All right, we will follow up on that question there. On unescorted access, if an office is secured within a facility and a sign is posted of no entry on the door, do people like custodians still require to have national fingerprint background checks, even if they do not go into those secured areas?
If they're not getting unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information, fingerprint-based background check is not required. So if you have a physically secure location where you are processing criminal justice information, if you choose to escort that person or hide the criminal justice information when that person is within the physically secure location, then no. But routinely that does not happen. What happens is that they'll have a fingerprint-based background check conducted on them and give them unescorted access into the physically secure location.
Great. Just a few more here, Chris. This person is just confirming that MFA is now required on all local trusted networks for every single user, regardless if you run state NLETS, NCIC transactions?
If it is unescorted access to unencrypted CJI, and let's make sure that it is CJI, right? Make sure it is criminal justice information. Then yes, multi-factor authentication is required for access to criminal justice information.
Let's see, trying to find some that are a little bit different. Would the local CJA or the CSA be responsible for identity evidence validation?
It depends on who assigns the identity on the within the directory store. If you're assigning the identity, you being the local, then the identity proofing would be required at that level. If it's a state that's doing it, then they're probably going to designate down to you to gather that evidence. It may be done differently in each state, but it's whoever is issuing the identity, the logical identity onto the criminal justice information system.
Great. Could you elaborate on the requirements to obtain legal opinion in SI4?
So you want to make sure when you're looking at monitoring your users on the system, make sure that you consult your legal your Office of General Counsel to make sure that the monitoring you're doing is legally sound and it's allowed. You don't want to be monitoring, on the system for something that may not be acceptable at either the state or the federal areas, or state or federal levels for that monitoring, that system monitoring.
And then somebody's asking for clarification on 5.12.1 interface agency. May ask for a review by the CSO in extenuating circumstances where the severity of the offense and the time that has passed would support a possible variance. What is considered enough time?
So there are no adjudicative guidelines. So what this question is asking about, if an interface agency, a local agency, is processing someone, a fingerprint-based background for someone they're going to give access to the system, and a criminal history exists. If it's a felony, the identity is immediately not allowed to have access to the system. However, the interface agency can consult with the CJIS systems agency looking for that variance, looking for the time that has expired since the felony took place, or perhaps the identity has chosen to expunge the event. There is no specific time. There are no national adjudicative guidelines, so therefore it resides with the CJIS systems officer of each state.
And then another question on MFA. Can you speak to where the MFA has to be done? Meaning if they log into Windows and the MFA is done, then with NetMotion or Duo, does that satisfy all the application used on the device, or does each software system require MFA separately?
So it depends. That's a great security answer. It depends. If everyone has the same privileges once they sign on to the domain, then you can do multi-factor authentication at the domain level, and then everything behind there would be able to say, yeah, we've multi-factored at the domain level. Everybody has the same permissions. But if there's different permissions once you sign into the domain level, i.e. that I would have access to the domain, Alex would have access to the domain, but then once we get into the Windows desktop, maybe only Alex has access to criminal justice information. And if that's the case, then the multi-factor authentication to be compliant with the CJIS security policy would have to happen at the application level. But you can also use a management profile, a SAML assertion. Perhaps I can assert the multi-factor authentication over to that application as well. So that would result in single sign-on. But it depends on the level of permissions that each identity has once they get into the Windows environment or the desktop environment. Let me just.
Okay. Can you have two lasso officers in institutions where there may be multiple IT employees over different aspects, i.e. a security IT employee and one that works directly with the DPS department.
Absolutely. The LASSO is assigned by the CJIS systems officer of each state, and there should be a LASSO, local agency security officer, in each entity that has the access to criminal justice information. The possibility of having 1, 2, 6, it's up to the CJIS systems officer of each state. But yeah, that's their decision.
Great. To clarify, we will no longer be accepting social security numbers and birth certificates as primary identification for new employees, or am I misunderstanding?
When it comes to unescorted access to unencrypted CJI and identity proofing, a U.S. Social Security card is considered a weak piece of evidence, and a certified or original copy of the birth certificate is also considered a weak piece of evidence. Again, this is getting access to criminal justice information that doesn't take precedence over your HR processes there. But if you're identity proofing someone for unescorted access to unencrypted CJI, Social Security card or certified or original birth certificate is not acceptable.
Great. And then for remote identity proofing, are we required to record and maintain the recording of that online session?
You need to look at the audit records that you're doing. I know that if you're doing it remote, that's a lot of storage when we get into looking at that face-to-face recognition or face-to-face interaction here. I would simply look at the evidence that you've collected, make sure that you're keeping that as long as the identity exists on the information system. But as far as the video recording of the remote session, I'm going to say no. Do not need to keep that.
Okay. So I think that pretty much covers it, Chris, in terms of the questions here. And if there are others that we may have missed, like I said, folks, we will be sure to go through the log of questions that came in and collaborate with Chris and his team and make sure that you folks have answer to your questions that have arisen throughout this presentation. And as questions arise moving forward, we'd be happy to help provide you folks with the information necessary to move forward with your CJIS compliance. So Charlie or Chris, any other parting thoughts before we close out today's session? I know there were some questions about resources as well, and we will be sure to consolidate those. We will, as Chris mentioned, make sure to PDF the presentation and distribute that to everyone that was registered today. And I know folks were asking about the stuff without the fluff, Chris, and the companion document. So I think I threw that link in the chat box here, but we'll make sure to include that in follow-up communications as well.
Yeah. Just in closing, again, I apologize for the internet connectivity problems that I've had today. Thank you. I see that we're still around 270. Thank you for staying with us. That means a lot to me. And again, I apologize. If you have questions, send it to iso@fbi.gov, and we'll make sure to get you back. But thank you guys very much, and I apologize for the internet connectivity. And with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Schaefer.
Thanks, Chris. I just had one thing for Alex to make sure that we send our contact information out to the attendees to make sure that if they want to volunteer or work with us to support this activity, I'm happy to entertain those and also answer questions from an industry perspective. If they have industry questions, happy to address them. And like I said in my opening remarks, there are a number of different industry partners that can support your needs, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we can help point you to the direction of where you want to go to seek advice and guidance. That's what the Institute's all about. And so we're here to help.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Chris and folks. We certainly appreciate everyone bearing with us today. I know it was tough at parts to understand some of the content, but we'll be sure to continue collaborating with Chris and his team to make these educational opportunities available. Charlie mentioned some of the working group products that are in the pipeline. And if you folks are subscribed to our mailing list, following us on social media, and checking our website regularly, you shouldn't miss some of those opportunities. I did provide Chris's email address, or the ISO@FBI.gov email address, in the chat box, as well as the info@ijis.org email address. If any questions come up, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we will do our best to get these resources consolidated and back to you all, so you have the information you and your agency and teams need to be successful with this moving forward. But we appreciate everyone's time today, and we'll look forward to future iterations of this moving forward. So thanks again, and stay tuned for more.